As you know, Consumers International and its members all over the world have been focusing on sustainable lifestyles and sustainable consumption for a lot of years. We've got some really incredible projects and work that we do on our day-to-day life. And this is an important session because this is the first time we are talking about how consumers, when they are joined as a collective, they can create an effective change for the entire system. So this is an interesting session, and I hope you have a great time. Before we kick off, some housekeeping rules for everyone in the audience. We have interpretation available in French and Spanish. To activate this, please go to More and select Interpretation and choose the language in which you would like to listen to this session, like you can see at the bottom of your screen. Further, we have closed captions also available where you can activate using the captions button at the bottom of your screen, where you can select the speaking language as well as the caption language of your choice. I would request all the speakers and attendees, if you come off mic at any point, please speak clearly and slowly. Ground rules. Kindly note this session will be recorded and you will have access to these videos on demand on YouTube within 24 hours to 48 hours of the session. Attendees must adhere to the event code of conduct that was shared with you during the registration. We would love to hear from you to share your thoughts and so have enabled Slido technology throughout. Please have your phone to hand to scan the Slido and respond. This is a Slido link for a poll that we have started, and we'll show the results of it right at the end. I would request my colleagues to share the link of the Slido poll as well, where we are asking the question, rank the most important action businesses, policymakers, and consumer advocates should take to help consumers live sustainably. At this point, I want to now kick off our session by welcoming one of the first speakers on this panel, that is Caroline Holme. Caroline, welcome. Caroline is the Executive Director at GlobeScan, a global insights and strategy consultancy with a purpose to co-create a sustainable and equitable world. And Caroline collaborates with some of the world's most leading influential corporate and nonprofit organizations to develop solutions that generate long-term value for both the organizations and society. I want to kick off by bringing in Caroline here. And Caroline, if you could share with us, some of the latest trends that GlobeScan has been, tracking around, consumers and their willingness to live more sustainably. Over to you, Caroline.
Great. Thanks so much for the introduction, Aayushi. Great to be here, and very good to have lots of people on the call. I'm just going to share my screen to kick us off. So you gave quite a nice introduction to GlobeScan. Yes, we're an insights and strategy consultancy, and we work with companies, NGOs, and governmental organisations on research related to sustainability and engagement. We are Canadian. You can't tell from my accent, as I'm not, but we've been going for nearly 40 years now, and we've been working with Consumers International just for a few years on insights related to sustainable lifestyles, which is what we're going to look at today. And just to introduce our session today, I'm going to share the consumer voice. So this is from our annual Healthy and Sustainable Living study, and it's an online survey of consumers or people in more than 30 countries across the global north and the global south. You can see them all on this map on the screen. And we have several design partners involved across different sectors. They're listed on here, and one of them in the middle at the top there is Consumers International, and we're really proud and pleased to be working with Aayushi and her colleagues on this. And the results that I'm going to share today are from our survey last year, and this took place, you can see on the right, in July and August. And I think this is going to set the scene quite well for the discussion that we're going to have in a moment. So this is the voice of the consumer. So let's start with a really high level, some really high level insights around the global context. So on the left here, you can see the top 3 global concerns that people have from a much longer list of over 20 different geopolitical, environmental and social problems. So the top concerns are around war and conflict, rated very serious by 67% of people across those 31 countries. Water pollution, rated very serious by 63%, and climate change by 62%. And then on the right here, there's 2 areas where people feel personally affected. So the increased cost of living, with 60% of people saying they feel greatly affected by this. So that's again across all of those countries. And then climate change, with 46% feeling greatly affected. And I think what's interesting with climate change is around the trends on this personal impact. So this sense of personal impact has increased by 14 points since 2020, when we first asked this question. And some of the impacts that people mention, they do vary quite a lot by region and by country, but the top of the global list are heat, and also increases in food prices. So a bit of a link between those different impacts around the cost of living and climate change. But at the same time, even though we've got those high levels of concern and impact, we've also seen these trends where many people, especially younger generations, are becoming increasingly disengaged and disempowered about the environment. So on here, you can see these steady declines in those lines at the top there since 2020, and that's in the percentage of 18 to 24-year-olds who want to reduce their impact on the environment. And then that second line, those who feel guilty about their impact. So those have gone down, but we've also had this increase, the red line, in those who feel that individuals can't do much to save the environment, although that one has now plateaued over the last 2 or 3 years. And this is mirrored, this is a trend that's mirrored in a lot of the large-scale consumer studies that we conduct, for example, with IKEA, that you can find on our website if you'd like to have a look. And in our survey, we asked people what they're actually doing across a long list of many different sustainable actions. And while some of those have increased, many have plateaued, many are pretty stuck over the last few years. And this is kind of illustrated in this little chart here, showing the data on the values action gap. So we can see here that 50% of people want to be more sustainable, but only half that number have actually made major changes in their lifestyle to be more sustainable. And this, just to remind you, this is the global picture, but the say-do gap, this exists in all countries. It just varies as to how wide it is. And we've identified some of the barriers, sort of why that gap is there, and what's stopping people from taking action. And here are just a few that people included in their top 3 barriers from a much longer list. And I want to highlight the top 4 out of the 6 on here. So the biggest bubble here is cost, then lack of support from the government, and then from business. And then that sense of this lack of motivation to change. So people are recognizing that they can't take action on their own. They need support, and they need to see action from government and business more than from NGOs, which is over on the right-hand side there. So I've shared a lot of data very, very quickly before our discussion, and I just want to summarize what the research is telling us about how to close the values action gap, how to encourage sustainable lifestyles and unlock behaviour change at scale. And the first one is really to make sustainability irresistible by ensuring sustainable lifestyles are accessible, available and affordable. And that is one of the key components of Consumers International's principles for a just transition. And then also selling the benefits and inspiring consumers away from that sense of indifference that we're seeing more and more. And then the other piece is to make sustainability inevitable, and that's through infrastructure, education, collective action. So not just from consumers, but from governments, business, and other organisations. So that's just how I wanted to kick us off for the discussion. And over to you, Aayushi.
Thank you so much, Caroline. And that's a great start to the session. And I would say that where you mentioned about sustainable lifestyles becoming inevitable, and the next round of discussion that we want to have is just about that. Like, how do we make sustainable lifestyles inevitable? This could be through collective action. And I want to introduce our next set of speakers. That's firstly Angela Lungati. She's a seasoned technologist, community builder, and advocate for open source software. And she launched Ushahidi, she's an executive director of a leading Africa-led nonprofit technology company. Angela, if you could, take us through the work that you're doing at Ushahidi and how you're building this collective action, it would be really great for the audience.
Thank you so much, Aayushi, and it's an honor to be here. Just quick correction: I'm not one of the founders. I've been with the organization for many years, but I've been at the helm as executive director for the last 5 to 6 years. So just a quick background: Ushahidi is a global technology nonprofit that's been helping people worldwide to surface community-generated data to influence and drive impact across various sectors in over 160 countries. And the main goal that we've had over the years is to ensure that people everywhere can easily gather data and then generate insights from that data to help them tackle issues that matter most to them. Our focus is, or rather has been and continues to be, ensuring that people who are rarely heard by decision makers, making sure that they are able to share their lived experiences in ways that will allow them to get the outcomes that they want, to ensure that decision makers also have the right data and insight to help them to support these communities that they are committed to serving, and that overall we're also, creating a world where people really value community-generated data sets and that those can grow into public goods that serve as a resource to improve society. So for over close to 2 decades, we've argued and proven that insights from ordinary citizens and consumers can, and their collective intelligence can help to provide a richer understanding of the world's most pressing issues. For example, around crisis response, by helping communities recover from disasters, by having them really share exactly what their challenges are and what they need. Strengthening good governance by driving transparency in elections, by allowing people to share their experiences before, during, and after elections. On the human rights protection side, just again, surfacing people's lived experiences around different human rights violations and having that lead to policy change. And more recently, also in advancing climate action by really trying to engage with local communities, understand what their energy consumption patterns are like, and see what potential drivers of the crisis might be, or what their intelligence over the last couple of years could do in terms of influencing how they adapt to the crisis. Overall, I think we've come to realize that collective intelligence is actually a really powerful resource in ensuring that the needs of consumers are appropriately and adequately addressed. And especially given the current global outlook, I think it's becoming clear that it is going to be even more critical to ensure that we are engaging with local communities and consumers to really understand what their changing needs and struggles are, to really help us design the right solutions and products, but also give them agency in how they can be part of the solution. So I'm really looking forward to the conversation we are going to have and digging deeper into what some of the challenges are and how we can come out of it. Thank you, Aayushi.
Amazing, Angela. Yes, exactly. Like collective intelligence and bringing that agency amongst consumers is really, really important. And that gives me a great segue to bring in our next speaker. That's UC Nevanlina, who looks after the lifestyle test app and its future evolution at Sitra, the Finnish Innovation Fund. The lifestyle test actually inspires people to move towards positive and sustainable lifestyles. But more from UC. UC, if you could join us. Great.
Thank you. And thank you for the invitation. It's a great honor to be here. I'm going to talk about an app we built, and this app is addressing how people can look at their impact on climate, and then more importantly, what to do about it, sort of closing the action gap. And why we built it is, turns out we can trace back more than 70% of all CO2 emissions to individual daily choices, what we decide to eat, what we buy, how we move around, and if we travel. And yet, mostly climate change initiatives have looked at the systemic side of the coin. So we wanted to look at the individual side and help people see their impact. We are now in 10 countries. We've been live for 18 months. There is 403,000 tests taken. And the action plans collectively mean 100,000 flights, 2-hour flights have been saved, meaning all of the people who took action accumulated saved CO2 worth 100,000 flights for 2 hours, for example, London to Rome. So with that, I would like to demo the app. It's on my phone. I'm going to just click through and sort of give you a sense of how this is going to work in practice. So you see my phone here, and just to make it sort of more personal, I'll do my own footprint. So no secrets hidden here. I'm going to show you how this all works, and you get a sense. And then in the panel, we'll discuss about the data behind this app. So I go ahead and start. And in our house, we've got 2 people only, my wife and I. Our house is large because we were hoping to build a family, but life turned out different. We've got some extra space now. We got purely green energy. It's all solar. A terraced house. It's built before 1990s. We use very modern heating, which is important in Finland. It's cold here in winter, geothermal heat. We energetically renovated house, new windows and such. And we are in South Finland, important for heating again. And then we keep the house pretty cool in winter, 19 degrees. And then my personal showers are pretty short in a week, about 30 minutes. And here we go. My house is 500 kilos per year as a footprint. Now, what about my transportation? Well, I do drive quite a bit. I go to our summer house, 100 to 400 kilometers a week. I have a very old petrol car, good for life cycle analysis, not so great because I should really have an electric one. Nevertheless, it's an old Golf petrol, and one person typically rides with me, my wife. I don't much use public transportation to go to work. I fly last year to California for an important wedding. This year, I hope I don't fly. I take the train in Europe, so I'm going to say I don't travel by plane. But I do take the ferry to get to Sweden to go train south to Brussels, for example. I cycle once a week. So you can see my transportation-related footprint, about 3,000 kilos. What about eating? Well, no secrets today. I'm a mixed eater. I tend to probably eat less than my friends. I eat red meat probably less than once a week, but the lowest choice here is 1 to 3 times a week. I do eat chicken and fish probably 4 to 7 times a week, equally cheese, and I do take milk with my coffee every day, 4 to 7 times a week. I do tend to drink quite a bit of coffee, 3 to 5 cups a day. Finns drink the most coffee in the world, if you didn't know. I don't throw much food away, seldom. Here we go, 2,200 kilos, about Finland average for food. Now, what about shopping? Easy for me. I don't like much shopping. I buy high quality and not often. So I buy what I need. I don't buy enough secondhand or pre-owned. So I'm going to say seldom. A particular question for Finland, do I have a summer house? I do. I use it in the summer. My wife and I use it, so 1 to 4 people share it. And then finally, we have 2 little dogs, and unfortunately, they do eat meat-based diet, but not a lot, less than 50 euros a month. And here we go. Now for the data side, we also ask if you want to answer what's your age and these kind of things. So report your age, you can report your gender, or and then what sort of city you live in, or are you in rural area, how much you make, or if you want to skip, you can say I don't want to answer. And test done, less than 5 minutes, couple of minutes, and you got your footprint. We don't give you just a number, we give you a sort of a little snippet. We think you really know how to handle your home. That's my lowest footprint, while my diet is probably too heavy on animal-based food. You can scroll and see how you compare to other countries or your own country, but really the key thing is the tips, what to do now, because one thing is to measure, the action matters. And here we give tips in the same order. My house is pretty good, so even if I moved to a smaller house, it wouldn't help me a lot. But I could rent my room to a guest, or otherwise no ad sign, already 50 kilos. I choose, and we start tracking the little tracker at the bottom. My big one is transportation. So I could buy an electric car. Now, 1,600 kilos is what I would plan to reduce. And then food, again, I could become vegan. Probably it's too much. I'll report I can't do it. I don't know how. It's too expensive. And probably it's not popular. No, thank you. This is important for the data side, because now we can see for the systemic side what people are skipping. Going vegetarian for a year, maybe not vegetarian day, that sounds right. I can also report things I already do, like one plate approach. I already do it. Now we count down your footprint. And then, care and repair, I could say already do it. Good job, my footprint went down. Adjusting temperature at the empty holiday house, I already do it. And then that's how it runs. And we sort of calculate in real time your footprint down, and we make your plan. And then in the final page of the thing, you've got your plan. And that's going to say, in my case, that I have chosen now no ads on the door, please, and buy an electric car, have a vegetarian day. And then I can come here and I can say, well, that's done. And now we keep calculating your completion to your plan. You can save the plan if you want, you don't have to. And then we offer little tips in the future. Right now we ask, what sort of help do you want, tips? And that's it. I'll say one last thing and I hand over. We're going to talk in the panel more about this sort of question of data. Because, everyone can do as much as they can, but as we just heard, systemic change is needed too. And so we sort of think about individuals, how to help them, that's the app. But we do look at the trends and how we might want to change the system around individuals to empower them further. So thanks, I'll stop sharing and I'll hand over back to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jussi. That was really incredible, and having that kind of information and recommendations shared with you, it's really interesting. At this point, I want to bring in David Eichberg, who is Mastercard's Vice President Sustainability, who's responsible for developing innovative strategies, thought leadership, and differentiating policies across a range of Mastercard's environmental, social, and governance issues. David, it would be really interesting for us and the audience to understand, what is Mastercard doing to bring in consumers together and using your technology and your services to mobilize them to live more sustainably. Over to you, David.
Thanks, Yushi, and good day to everybody. I very much appreciate the opportunity Consumers International had bringing us into the conversation and hosting these webinars throughout this week. We approached this like many of the voices here, and really looking back, I think it was what Yushi had mentioned around the third working group report of the IPCC, the latest IPCC report that estimated that a comprehensive demand-side strategy across all sectors could reduce GHG emissions by somewhere between 40 and 70%. And this was by looking at applying multiple types of interventions out there, from nudging consumers to eat more sustainably or to buy more repairable or durable products, or even redesigning the infrastructure to help people shift from cars to biking or public transport. And these kinds of different interventions in behavioral design can range from the provision of information and content, like we just saw, aspects of social connection, incentives, and even just the raw choice architecture. What are the options and how are they really presented to you? Mastercard is working with the World Resources Institute's Living Lab, so we can better understand and affect and measure the impact of our interventions on consumer choices in key areas for our business, as well as key areas of emissions impact, particularly when we think about food and transportation choices. And in transportation in particular, we have a key focus around urban mobility and looking to make how you access and how you pay for urban mobility much easier, more convenient, whether that's in the form of mass transit or micro-mobility or ride sharing. And so in this way that consumers can have less impact than driving their own vehicle by effectively taking the friction out of accessing these types of options. So in this way, our types of solutions, which we call open loop, but people often experience it as that tap to pay, whether you're at the turnstile or you're at buses or trams, for instance. And just to share an example here quickly, last fall, Mastercard launched this tap and go transit campaign, which we've now is launched across 17 markets in the world. That's really focusing on how can we transform that user journey on public transport, really, frankly, to be more fun and a more social and engaging experience, in part by educating them how simply easier it is for them now to access it by tapping their phone or their wallet. And combining this now with a range of gamification, influencer content, socially generated content, rewards, and ultimately messaging that we can put around what are these environmental benefits are of making this type of choice. In this way, you know, we've recognized that digitization is a key driver to enabling the success of really seamless, connected urban mobility in cities. And for ticketing and public transportation, this helps generate a more user-friendly, financially inclusive, and effective ecosystem that's helping riders more seamlessly access these types of transit options and ultimately have a lower environmental impact. That's just one of the examples. Happy to share more as the conversation goes on.
Thank you so much, David. And I now want to bring in the larger panel to the discussion as well. If we can bring up Caroline, Markus, and yes, amazing. All right, so I think this was like a great backdrop to, you know, our discussion where we've spoken about, you know, the value action gap from Caroline's work and the work that GlobeScan's doing and, you know, making things inevitable for consumers. We've spoken about collective intelligence and collective action from Ushahidi's perspective. And we've seen Mastercard also doing these kind of interventions where they're making frictionless and more accessible options available for its consumers and customers as well. I want to bring in all of you on the question that while we are doing so many different interventions in our own ways, where we are, you know, sharing insights about what consumers really want, we talking about, you know, giving agency back to consumers. We are providing data and information to consumers about what they could bring, like what changes they could bring to their lifestyles. And we are also ensuring that our services make things frictionless. What are the barriers that consumers are facing, even after all these kind of interventions that, you know, we are proposing, we are delivering on ground? What are the barriers that consumers are experiencing to live more sustainably? And I want to bring in Caroline first to share this with us.
Yes, I touched on quite a few of the barriers earlier when I shared the results from the consumer studies. So we had cost, we had lack of support from governments of business, and we had that kind of sense of indifference and a sense of disengagement. So I think probably a good way to look at the barriers is really a couple of points to make. One is that the barrier, there's practical barriers and then there's emotional barriers. And I think that is kind of a key thing. It's quite helpful to see those in two different ways. The practical barriers, they vary considerably across the different actions. So I think we could talk about, you know, sustainable lifestyles as a whole sort of a gamut of different actions, but actually they are all quite different and there's different approaches for each. The emotional piece is probably more cross-cutting. And I think that is something, I think people do need to feel a bit more hope. They do need to feel a bit more inspired. And I'm sure we can talk about that a little bit more in this discussion. But I think one thing that we have found in some of the work we've done is that people don't know which actions have most impact. So we've seen that, you know, over and over again. When you look at what actually does have impact, what people are doing, there is a disconnect. And that's why I think what Yusi was sharing, I think that's a great initiative. It's a great app because it is kind of looking at, it gives people a sense of what happens if you do certain things. And as I said, they're all very, very different. So I think that lifestyle test is amazing and a really good solution that does cut across lots of different things.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Caroline. And I want to bring in Angela here as well. Like you have been, collecting data from consumers and citizens. Where do you see the barriers for consumers to kind of adopt these kind of lifestyles?
Yeah, I think I'll just double down on something that Caroline said, and really is around education and awareness. And it'll also vary depending on which part of the world you're in, but many consumers really do lack access to clear and accurate information about what sustainable living will look like. That's further complicated by misinformation and then, not having adequate conversations. So that makes it very challenging for people to make informed choices, because if you don't understand the impact of what your consumption patterns are, then you're less likely going to adopt a different way of living. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done on that side. I think the second thing might also be, an enabling environment. So it really does feel like, at least in many parts of the world, there is a lack of support, at least on the infrastructural side and even on the policy side, which makes it very difficult for consumers to then adopt sustainable lifestyles. One example that really did bring this to life for us is, we've been running a project in Tana River County in Kenya, which tends to be ravaged by severe drought or, very heavy flooding. And we partnered with, World Vision as well as GIZ to really try and understand what the community's energy, what their consumption patterns were like, what their economic activities were, in a bit to try and understand what potential drivers could be. And we found this paradox in a local tax ordinance. So nursery tree farmers were getting taxed more than people who are cutting down trees to sell charcoal. That right there's this a perfect example that kind of brings that to life. And it wasn't until we kind of engaged with them directly and had people sharing the reason why they do this that came out. So I think, and I'm sure there's many more others that we could dive into, but I think those for me would be probably some major ones. And then pair that as well with that agents to participate. When you have that environment that isn't enabling that, or you have, say, lack of access to recycling programs, or there being restrictive housing policies, then it does make sustainable living rather difficult.
Okay, that's really interesting. And I want to bring in David. David, from a brand perspective, from Mastercard's perspective, what do you see as barriers for consumers to adopt these kind of lifestyles?
Yeah, I would very much along the lines of what we've seen Angela and Caroline say and share. That lack of sort of hope and optimism, as well as information and access to more convenient options. But what I would add is, there is, whether it's perceived or it's real, there's that difference in cost and or quality. And that's an important one not to forget. And I think it's also, there can often be there's a lack of what might people see as sort of that personal or immediate benefits to them, connecting it to their values and their lifestyles. Sustainability, often we look at it as it doesn't have to be the primary reason. Sometimes it doesn't have to be the conscious reason. It could be the outcome, as we saw with transit. But we've heard from a lot of other brands say sustainability is the and, it's not the or. And it's even, as one apparel merchant said, it's a gift with purchase, right? So I think looking at it as a bundle that still delivers on the value that the consumer needs is critical.
Amazing. And there are some really interesting points out there, like sustainability being the end outcome. And so that's really interesting. And at this point, I want to bring in Markus. Now, Markus was most recently director at the Finnish Innovation Fund at Sitra, and currently is the CEO of Sparkta, which is a sustainability consultancy. Markus, you're here to talk about PS lifestyle. You have looked at this for a long period of time. Where do you see the barriers for consumers to adopt sustainable lifestyles?
I think all of the barriers have been mentioned already, so maybe I'll just rephrase them in another way. I think the first thing is that people need to feel that they can do things differently. And then what David was saying earlier, that why would they change? That needs to be clear for the individual. And very often it's not sustainability that moves people. It's better health, saving time, saving money, having a good time with your friends, and so forth. So how can we attach those kind of major motivations to those suggestions of what to do differently? And what we've tried to do with the lifestyle test app is to frame the suggestions that we make in a way that they are positive things that you can do more of as an individual. And that creates this positive cycle of change. And you actually can talk to your neighbor, your friend, that, hey, I tried the city bike. I've made a vegetarian dish for my family, and it was not as kind of difficult as I thought initially when I had never tried. So we need to get people to try these new behaviors once, twice, share what they've done with others, and then we can get the kind of ball rolling. But I do agree with what Caroline was saying, that very often people feel that sustainability can be too expensive, too difficult. So there are these myths that sustainable behaviors are somehow hard. But maybe we should not use the word sustainability almost at all. You can see it in the lifestyle test. We don't say that it's a sustainability app. It's not a green app, nothing like that. It's just the fact that every one of us wants to live a good life and improve our lives. So how do we make that happen in a way that creates smaller environmental impact? And that's what we want to do. And everyone is motivated to improve their life. And how do we do it in a way that creates the smallest possible negative impact on the planet?
Got it. And this really interesting point, because yesterday we had a similar discussion where we spoke with Accenture Song, and they also mentioned about moving like beyond just the concept of sustainability and look at the value systems that consumers have. And here you're talking about what is a good life for consumers, and then kind of lead with that message. But there are still some structural challenges that are there that David has mentioned. And I want to bring back Angela to talk about some of these barriers that consumers on a systemic level experience, and what's the best practice to bridge and address this when it comes to the value action gap or leading the consumers to that good life. Angela.
Thank you, Aayushi. I think it's, again, doubling down on what Markus just mentioned at the end about the cost, and especially within the Global South. I think it's really worth recognizing that access to financial resources is a significant barrier, because there is a higher upfront cost to sustainable living, and that makes it inaccessible to many. We're not seeing enough incentives and subsidies for green choices, and that being accessible, especially to lower income consumers. So that definitely is a significant challenge. But when you look at now, what the best practice would look like in terms of trying to bridge some of the gaps and some of the challenges that we've mentioned, I think one of the major ones that we've really been a huge advocate for at Ushahidi is, having intentional engagement with consumers, and not it being extractive. I think we've seen many sustainability initiatives fail because they're designed in ways that are extractive, whether that's in terms of effort or knowledge, as opposed to them being designed in ways that empower individuals to become active participants. And some of the ways that we can build that intentionality is, one, co-create solutions with communities rather than imposing top-down approaches. They are the ones who really understand what their way of living is, and what ways of adaptation will actually make sense for them. And so that means integrating them into the solution, into developing solutions from the very get-go, having it be more of an iterative design rather than a top-down one. Second thing would be to ensure that the economic and social benefits are equally distributed across the board, and then recognize and integrate the local knowledge around how people are already practicing sustainability. So I think sometimes we have a general assumption that there are people who aren't, but as human beings, we tend to be adaptive by nature. When something doesn't work, we try and find interesting ways. So looking at what that looks like. Second thing would be try and meet people where they are. right? So, and that really will require out-of-the-box thinking. It will require us to really embed ourselves to understand what the challenges are, what tools people have access to really help us think about how we're designing. Look at, if you're designing education campaigns, what are the channels you should use? What languages should you do that in? Is there culturally relevant messaging that you also need to incorporate? And then most importantly, build trust, because without trust, everything that you're trying to introduce will not work. If a consumer doesn't know you or doesn't trust who you are or trust what your intentions are, it doesn't matter how much you try and drill down, they will not take the messaging in. And that might mean also partnering with communities that have, or organizations that have better proximity, right? For example, we build technology. We are not the ones who are plugged into some of these rural areas, right? But there are people who've been working with those communities for years. How do we partner with them to ensure that the message is being passed across, or that they're able to leverage technology in useful ways? So, yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Angela. That intentional engagement piece is going to stick with me from this conversation. I want to bring in David. David, what has been the best practice that you have seen to address this intention action gap from Mastercard's perspective?
Yeah, I would say what we think about Mastercard, and as Angela was mentioning, the role of trust. Mastercard already operates, it's a globally trusted network that spans an ecosystem of cardholders with over 3.4 billion cards in issuance today, 100 million points of acceptance around the world, and tens of thousands of banking partners. So that role as a technology and data provider around payments and transactions, and the trust that comes with that, together with our customers and our merchant partners, Mastercard is working to bridge this gap by, when we look at it, inspiring, informing, and enabling more sustainable choices. So inspire to us is how we stir up that hope and optimism in people's ability to affect change and see their place within the system. And sometimes that's even by incentivizing and rewarding people for making more sustainable choices. Mastercard does this by connecting to consumers' passions. The example I gave around Tap and Go and Play campaign, for instance. And in another area, we're currently running a food choice pilot at a university in the UK, there with the local food service provider in a cafeteria, a couple of startups that are part of the Mastercard Start Path program, where we're utilizing environmental impact information about different products on the menu to present that as a gamification way for, again, informing and inspiring these patrons, and then rewarding them with incentives on things like free micromobility rides back to their dorm from the cafeteria and the like. Our second area around inform, that refers to how the importance of providing data about the impact of people's purchasing choices in ways that they can understand and digest, and then follow up with action. Very much like the PS Lifestyles app, for instance. In this vein, we're supporting sustainable choices by providing consumers with actionable data and information about these purchases, making it easier for them to reduce their impact. Mastercard's carbon calculator, which we developed in collaboration with Duconomy, consumers can track their estimated carbon footprint on their purchases each month across various spending categories. And we're also developing elements on the business side, such as a global treasury intelligence finance tool to help corporations have more visibility into the ESG scores of their suppliers. And then the third area is enable. And like I was describing before, it's how we remove barriers so that people are empowered to make these more sustainable choices and that they can become the default. So I spoke about this in terms of urban mobility, where we're looking through solutions like that Tap to Ride to help foster a frictionless, accessible transit experience. In a similar way, we're working to take that friction out and increase the convenience and the efficiency for transactions in the circular economy. When you think about deposit returns for reusables and recycling, or product buyback and resale, and product as a service. And as an example, in Denmark's second largest city, Aarhus, and in the UK at a number of sites, a Mastercard Move technology is supporting new programs where consumers can return their reusable beverage cups to a reverse vending machine from a partner of ours, Tamra, and simply tap their MasterCard on the machine, much as you would at another point of purchase, and receive your deposit directly back onto your card. So by infusing these kinds of digital solutions, we're simplifying the consumer experience and then actively enabling people to more seamlessly engage and to enable businesses and communities to scale up these types of offerings and realize real cost and efficiency savings. I mean, we know that the environmental benefits here, but it's notable that in that city in Denmark, inside of 1 year, across the community, they reduced cup waste by over 630,000 cups. And that was just actually in the first 10 months of the program, equal to about 10 metric tons in cup waste, and they saved over 100,000 euros in waste management costs. So we're imagining a number of different ways that we can take these kind of seemingly simple transaction infrastructure and integrate it into other industries and applications. Like, what if we could do the same for every tube of mascara or a stick of deodorant or a shampoo bottle that you purchased and returned? Or if your favorite fashion retailer were able to seamlessly provide a payment to you, to your card, for bringing that over, that overcoat you had outgrown, or the pair of jeans that you wanted to return for upcycling.
Amazing. Thank you so much, David. That was really insightful. And at this point, I want to bring in Caroline and Markus as well. That like you have been collecting a lot of actionable data at GlobeScan as well as with PS Lifestyles app. Where do you see, like, what's the evidence-based work around consumer aspirations and desires for sustainable living? Can you share some of your learnings from there? I want to start off with Caroline first.
Yeah, I think it's really touchy on some of the things I shared earlier and some of the things we've heard already from the others on the panel today. There is this need for, I think there is this need for hope and for inspiration. And it's kind of, I think the word inspires, we mentioned quite a few times by some of the others. And I think it's really, there is an opportunity to sort of present a different kind of narrative around sustainable lifestyles, something a bit more positive than we've been seeing at the moment. And I think there is people need to be shifted out of this sort of the kind of the indifference and the sort of hopelessness that they're feeling at the moment. And there's been quite a bit in the media about this, how this need for a sort of a narrative of possibility rather than the sort of negative kind of probability narrative that we've been hearing quite a bit. So I think that's one thing. And then the other thing that we again has been talked about quite a bit by some of the others on the panel is these benefits. So we know that health and sustainability go together very well. Those, in fact, our study is called the Healthy and Sustainable Living because they're so intertwined, and these health benefits of sustainability, whether it's for the planet or for me personally, are just extremely compelling. And I think that kind of aspiration is a really important point. And then maybe the final thing is around examples, stories, examples, and that's really very much at a kind of individual level that we've had quite a few examples already, but hearing some of these real life stories is a really good thing to encourage people and to give them a greater sense of hope.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Markus, how are we changing this narrative using PS Lifestyle? How are we bringing that hope and inspiration?
Well, the main feedback we get from the users is that before using the lifestyle test, which you can use if you go to lifestyletest.eu, it's available for 10 countries, and there's a European average version for EU countries as well, that the users say that, oh, this is the only place where I've seen that it's not 1 or 2 or 3 things that I need to change, which seems to be impossible. So I can't become a vegan without a car and fly no longer. That's not an option for me. But we have more than 100 things that you can pick from, and they are tailored for each country so that they are relevant for that country, so that it feels Portuguese, it feels German, it feels Estonian, and so forth. And that has given people hope that, hey, I can build my own combination of actions, and I can see that even small actions if they're done by a large group of people, they actually matter. So, and this kind of, I'm not alone, I'm part of a bigger group who do these things. So I'm not a weird person, I'm a regular person. And we can see it from the plans that people make. They are normal people who use the lifestyle test because of the footprint is around 8,000 kilos. So we know that it's a kind of average European who's using this at the moment. But what gives us hope is that plans people make, and these are voluntary plans that they do for themselves, they are significant. So 20% cut on average on their carbon footprint for the first year. So those are kind of messages of hope. And then we can turn this into analytics on the data side, that we are not kind of talking about one individual, but what about a group of individuals, so that we can see that how could we do demand-based policy making and new product and service development that helps households and individuals to adopt these new behaviors that build good life for these people within the limits of the planet. And that's something that has never been done before, that you actually look at the demands of what are people able to do organically already, where are the obstacles, and how can new products, services, and new policies remove these obstacles from people.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Marcus, where you highlighted that, this kind of actionable data can not only inform consumers, but they can also inform policymakers and, businesses and, service delivery organizations as well about, what are the barriers and what is it that the consumers are willing to do themselves. So I think that's a great way of more or less closing this session, where I want to bring in, all of you, if possible, on that one thing that as, business or as someone who is bringing in that collective action from consumers' perspective or collecting data, what is that one thing we need to do to promote, sustainable lifestyles amongst consumers? And then I'm going to show the poll and the results from it about what our audience has said as well. More from the perspective of businesses and policymakers, what's that one action that they need to take to enable sustainable living? So I would start off with David first. David, what do you think from a business perspective? How do we enable sustainable living? What's that one thing, one magic ingredient?
Well, for us, it's the same touchstone for the business itself, which is make sure that we're always customer centric. So put the customer and put the consumer at the center here. I think back to the IPCC report again. We know the areas of opportunity because we know the areas of impact. And we know the behaviors that will drive change. And as we've talked about here, and it's been pointed through work of other groups like Futerra and B-Works, to trigger the right enabling actions, it's about understanding the barriers consumers face, and it's about focusing on identifying and elevating and delivering on those benefits. So I think how businesses respond is to listen to consumers. And if they're B2B to C, in a lot of ways as we are, it's understanding how your customers seek to serve those consumers. So where are consumers going and why? Focus on what makes these sustainable ways of living more, as Jussi was saying and others have said, it's about being healthier, happier, more efficient, sleeping better, things like this. Really get to the root of wants and needs so you can better tailor offerings or policies to incentivize more of that action. So we bring it back to this notion of what it takes to inspire and inform and enable to consumers to make those choices for themselves.
Amazing. Yeah. Can I bring in Angela next? Angela, what do you think? What's that one action that policymakers and businesses need to take?
I think everything's been said, but I think I would double down on this idea of really making sure that we're listening to what consumers' challenges are. So I think that would require, again, intentional engagement by policymakers or the people that they're building policies for, to really understand what the needs are, to then shape how they're thinking, as opposed to developing policies in a box and then having it come down. It's going to have to be a very collaborative effort with the consumers, the people who are serving the consumers, as well as policymakers.
Right. And in 20 seconds, Caroline, what is it that one thing that businesses and policymakers need to do?
That's so difficult, but I'm going to latch onto something that David said earlier. I think it's trust. So trust is the currency for all of this. So there's a responsibility to communicate authentically, to walk the talk, and otherwise consumers will see through it. So I think building trust is what I'd focus on for business and for governments.
And lastly, Markus, what is it that you'd suggest for policymakers and businesses to do?
I'll copy from the previous panelists. I think it's kind of be a trusted partner and understand people's needs, so that where are the obstacles, what are things people are already doing, amplify those and remove obstacles. And from April onwards, you can go to lifestyledata.eu and see all of this data yourself. And you can see where the obstacles are across these 10 countries, who are being blocked, why are they being blocked, how could you remove these blocks, and what are things that people are already doing and what they would like kind of more speed to go forward with.
Amazing. And I would quickly share the results from the audience as well, where we've seen that I think the most important thing that everyone's talking about is sustainable choices becoming more affordable, and second one being providing clear and honest information. That's something that we've spoken about is, like how do we create that transparency and trust? And of course, strengthening policies and regulations. And lastly is the use of technology for sustainability. So based on the poll, everyone's talking about how do we make it more affordable and also ensure that we provide clear and honest information. Thank you so much, everyone. On behalf of Consumers International, sincerely thank everyone for joining us, and especially David, Angela, Caroline, and Markus. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. We've got our next session starting off at the hour, and we'd love to have each one of you there as well, and the attendees who are here. Thank you so much, and it's going to be a great week for the Sustainable Lifestyle Summit, so do join us across the week. Thank you so much. Take care. Bye.